You're listening to the Gender Reveal Party podcast. I'm your host, Jay Pryor. This isn't your usual gender reveal party. There will be no baby sex parts. This is the real reveal, where we reveal gender through stories of brave humans willing to share their lived experience. Enjoy the listening. I sure enjoy making it. Hi, and welcome back to the Gender Reveal Party. I'm your host, Jay Pryor, and I am just delighted to have this guest today. His name is Damon Brown, and actually, Damon and I don't really know each other very well at all. So this is unique. It's unique to my podcast because I'm usually bringing my friends in here, right? So we are friendly and we've been acquainted, but this is the first time we ever had a chance to talk. So Damon, welcome to the Gender Reveal Party.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jay. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're a different guest, and we were talking about this before, because one of my commitments is to open this box of gender, right? And to really give everybody, not just those of us who are already blending gender and living this, but give everybody an opportunity to really have a chance to go, am I doing this because I want to, or am I doing this because because society's told me I have to, right? And you're somebody who I feel like has an insight into that. Damon is an author, speaker. I mean, all the things. How many TED Talks do you have? I mean, this guy's good. I'm serious.
I have 4. Yeah,
and I just read Career Remix, the audiobook that you have available.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
We are so aligned. It's not even funny. We could talk forever about that. So at some point we need to talk about actual coaching stuff that we're aligned on.
I'm a fellow coach. So
and we're very aligned in that way. And we're also aligned around where we spend our time and our energy. So I want to welcome you to the show and, have you share a little bit about yourself, and then let's jump in about all of the gender things that you know about.
Yeah, for sure. And so my background is journalism. Been a journalist for a lot of years. And when my partner and I got married, we ended up getting pregnant probably a month into it. And so it was one of those things. We're older parents, as they say. If you go to the hospital, they'll say, we're what's the term? Mature, I think is the term.
Right. Yeah.
So she was in the hospital. It's okay, these are advanced or mature parents. It's what? I'm in my 30s, relax. And so we made it clear to kind of tie into what the beautiful stuff you discussed on your show, is that my wife's a pediatrician. And so until recently, she shifted over to in-home job, but she had to go out. I have a complicated life because I always wanted to be a dad. Always wanted to be, to help lead kids to wherever they needed to be. Mm-hmm. But we also are both older. We've had our health issues and things like that. So when we got pregnant right away, it was oh, okay, this is surprising. This is great.
Yeah.
And so, within a year, we had our first kid, Alec. And when we first started dating many years ago, on our first date, we already knew, I think we fell in love at first sight. It was that kind of vibe. But we also knew the dynamics that we wanted to have. I've always run my own business. As a journalist, I've always been a freelance journalist, which means you do it independently, kind of you're not a staffer. Sure. I've done 2 startups and I'm selling the second one. I have a coaching practices like you do, et cetera. I do public speaking. And so I've always been on this independent route, even when I was much younger, when I met my partner. And we had decided then that I would be the one taking care of the kids and she'd be the one that would be out in the world. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting where we had met in our 20s. And so a lot of discussions that I have and the life that I live is kind of bucking the heteronormative norm.
Right.
That's the term for it. Heteronormative is the right term, but heteronormative norm. The norms of heteronormative.
Right. We can say the norms of the binary if we want to, because it is all binary.
Thank you. Binary is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And so automatically getting pushback from that, from families, from other people in the heteronormative space. And and having this complicated resonance with it. So our kid came, my wife went back to work at like the 3-month point. At the same time, I was working on my first startup. I just quit journalism, for lack of a better term. Still a journalist, but it wasn't my main thing anymore. And I started my first startup on my own. It's actually a colleague that's supposed to be helping me with it. And then he ended up leaving the project suddenly at the same time that I'm at home with my kid. So it ended up being this balance, which I talk about a little bit in Queer Remix and more in the earlier books, where for those first 2 years of his life, I had my hand in leading 2 startups and also leading my kid to where they needed to be.
Right.
And so I would wake up at 3:15 in the morning and work from 3:15 to 6 a.m. And at 6 a.m., like clockwork, he'd be awake. And then I'd have him from 6 a.m. to when my wife got home around 6 p.m. We'd eat dinner, what do you call it? Lather, rinse, repeat. Right? Which I know y'all have gone through that.
Oh, yes, we have.
Other parents can understand too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so the first startup was called So Quotable, which allowed you to capture people's quotes. It was a little app. I did everything myself. I finished the app about a week before TED up in Vancouver asked me to do my first TED talk, which was related to the app. So that got me on that journey. About a month after that, I ended up connecting with another person, actually 2 other people who were working on an app called Cuddler, Cuddlr, which connected people for hugs. So if you know Tinder and Grindr, this is like the hug, platonic version.
Wow, how cool is
that? I can
that?
talk about that for hours. Like
that's brilliant.
Co-founder, so.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, just one thing I want to say about that is I know, and the pandemic had to have had this be exponential. We had a situation at our spiritual community where we were doing surveys about different things and how things were going. And we had a congregate tell us that the only time they ever got touched is when they came. The only time they ever got touched is during that hugging time, because we did a lot of hugging. We're a huggy spiritual community. And so they were telling us that the only time that they ever got touched is when they came on Sunday. It was like, how important is it to get touched?
It's life. This was right. And I agree 100%. And this was in 2014 going to 2015.
Yeah.
And so we launched September 18th or so, September 2014. And that was a period of time where we had Facebook, which is, as you talked about in your gender reveal event, it's a way that you can stay in contact with these people that sometimes you want to stay in contact with. Sometimes you don't, right?
You don't.
You are going, right? So you have that. But then you also have this other extreme, which you talk about being touched, where you have the Tinders and the Grinders, and bless that space. There's a place for that. I used to live in San Francisco. I know the deal.
Yeah.
But with that, it's only saying, I want to do this in a hookup way. I want to do this. The only way I can feel touched is by hooking up with people.
Yeah.
But there's this big space in between. I mean,
you
got kids, you got your partner, I have kids, they're all over my head all the time. My partner that I'm with, like, it's awesome. I have a family. Realizing that not everyone has that. Right. And so we really want to get into that space. And we ended up having about 250,000 users within the first few months.
That's brilliant.
On the cover of the Wall Street Journal. And other half of people thought we were crazy, because it was like, why would people want to hug? Right. And so ended up being, again, this resistance, I would argue, to the heteronormative norm.
Right.
And it's binary, where it's like, you only touch when you're having sex.
Right. Especially if you're a man. Like, and especially if you're a man, right? Especially if you're a man.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. Exactly.
Right. Yes.
And I've always been very physical. And so the resistance through, my whole life, as far as me liking touch, and not even, again, just beyond the hookup culture. That culture is great too. Don't get me wrong. But it's like, but being able to just say, I want to be touched. I want to be hugged.
Yeah.
I want to be close to people.
Right.
There's a natural resistance to that.
Yeah.
And that's what's funny, bringing it to now, where suddenly we can't touch anymore.
Right.
And so as a social scientist, at least armchair, and an author, and as a coach, I'm like, oh my God, they get it now.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, the app,
It's huge
the app got
lesson.
acquired in 2015. So I haven't been founder of the app for 7 years now. And it's like 7 years later, it's like, oh, they see it now. It's not until that's taken away. And it's like, even if you're with super stereotypical, you're with your fishing buddies, you know, and someone passes you a beer and you're hanging out and you're close to that person, physically close to that person. It's like that doesn't register. People don't see that. And it's like, I want to spend time with my buddies. It's like, but you realize that that's a type of human contact. That's a type of physical closeness.
Yeah.
You know, even if it's through osmosis, even if you just give you a good handshake or whatever, that's still physical touch.
Right.
There seems to be that gap there. And I am fascinated by that gap. It's like, why don't we
so appreciate that? And I can't remember the name of the documentary I read it that I watched, that I'm blanking on. It was on Netflix, but it was all about masculinity. And one of the things that they talked about was, I think that they said by the time kids hit junior high, it's really, that's when that they can't hug each other anymore. Boys have to resort to wrestling in order to get touched, in order to be okay, or fighting to be okay, which is something, you know, I talked about this in the show. One of the most, I mean, it happened right off the bat, the first time I got punched in the face because somebody thought I was a dude. And as soon as he found out I was a female, he started bawling. You know, like
that part it broke my heart when I saw that. Like, that's amazing.
It was so fascinating. It broke my heart on so many levels. Like, it was like I was heartbroken for him, because I knew what it is to be a country boy taught you don't ever hit a woman.
Right.
I mean, there is a code he broke by accident. That for him had to be devastating. He had to deal with himself around that, right? Like, he had to deal with himself. So on every level, that was heartbreaking, right? And it's still like, I can still see it in my own kids who are in middle school right now.
Okay.
Dealing with this world of like, how can they touch each other? How do they touch each other? How is it okay? You know, this kind of thing. And the other thing for me that I remember so vividly, I don't think I tell this story at all. There was a situation when I was early in my transition, and I have a big family. I mean, I have a lot of nieces and nephews, and they're a particular age where I have like 10 nieces and nephews that are all within like 5 years of each other or something. And I adore these boys. And I'm talking to this young guy who I have started to grow an affinity for. He's done some in a coaching program I'm in. And he's going like this and writing, and his hair falls down in his face. And I just reached over and tucked it behind his ear. Because that's what women do. Like, that's just how I touch people, right. You know,
yeah.
It's not a big thing. But I gotta tell you, the look on his face when he looked up at me, and it was just like, what are you doing? You know, like, why would you ever think to touch me like that? Right.
You know, and what's interesting is that, to give you like their perspective from in that, you know, when you're young and, you know, you're making out and things of that nature, that often can be a first move. Oh,
right. And it wouldn't even occur to me. Like,
right. But say, yeah, that's
right. From a heterosexual, I'm not straight.
Oh, okay.
I know that you just see the look on his face. I mean, and that happened to me a lot because for part of my, you know, I was just talking to one of my other butch buddies who, from time, you know, a lot of my friends from time they were little, they were a stand to wear boys' clothes and things like that. For me, I just even know that was possible. Right.
Right. Right.
So part of it was A, it wasn't possible. B, I'm very fluid. So like, I can wear a dress and I can go do different things that some of my butch brothers just can't, because they're so butch. Like, they just feel like they're in drag if they did that. Right. And to some degree I did too, but I can be a lot more fluid. And so the other thing for me is like, I learned to flirt with men to get what I want. Like, I learned that there are certain things I can say to men and do, and men will just go, okay, you know, they'll just help me out, which is not a bad thing. It's great. But like, I learned that. And let me tell you, coming out of this face, not so much.
Right. Right. Depending on the environment, it can get really complicated really quick.
you something. And in the beginning, when you're just getting used to your new face and stuff like that, you're still your same person.
I would imagine so. Yeah.
So I'm like just, being myself and flirting with this guy to get him to open a jar for me or whatever it is. Whatever it is I want. And he looks at me like I've lost my mind.
Yeah, I mean, it is. That's fascinating,
right?
Yeah, and, the only light parallel I can find is I'm starting to get to the age where people are realizing I'm a little bit older now. So your treatment is different. So
right. Yeah.
I'll give it right. I'm sure you can relate. So I'll give a certain phase, and like the teenagers will stop doing whatever they're doing. Like whatever's going on, it's like, no, he's looks like somebody's dad. Like don't mess with him. Exactly. I imagine it's similar where it's like I feel the same inside.
Right.
But how I'm presenting is different. Right. Superficial version of it, but that's the closest parallel I can think of, where I'm starting to feel that now. I'm starting to get the gray hairs and stuff, and it's like, okay, I'm getting to that middle age part where it's like suddenly I'm presenting in a certain way, which is fascinating. But I mean, I'm really into how people interact and into relationships. Helps me co-founding that, the app. What I'm fascinated with, and what I'm curious about, I imagine as part of your journey, is there's a certain way to be charming to other straight guys, and there's a certain way to be charming to people who they're not attracted to me, and I'm not attracted to them.
Right. So
I guess it wasn't until you brought it up where I thought about it, where I'm fascinated with, like, there's charm, but it has to be within a certain social context of the times. And you think of like the aggressiveness of the charm in like the Mad Men era.
Right.
You can imagine, what's his name, Don Draper? Did you imagine Don Draper and like, again, some of the stories that you shared in your performance, but same type of thing where it's just like, wow, that's not charming. Like I don't know what that is. That's something else. But now that context is different. Right. As I talk about in Career Remix, I'm really interested in how we leave this pandemic, because we're not going to be the same. And I'm sure you've had those conversations with all the coaching that you do. We're talking to people and saying, whatever the norm is, that's gone. And so where my energy is saying, we had this unique period of time. It's been 2 years, maybe another year. So it's a 3-year period where we can kind of reset the norms. And so now there's like my super straight, we'll use that term, super straight male compatriots who are like only see heteronormative culture, don't even know what the word heteronormative means.
Right.
They're changing diapers. Right. They're doing the dishes.
They are.
You know what I mean? Like, it feels weird to say that because I do that all the time, but that's not, for them, that's not the norm. Right. But their behind is at home now. Yeah. So now they're seeing all the work, and I do most of the housework. So all the work that I've done, all the work that the heteronormative women have done, cis women, they're seeing all that. Yeah. And they're like, oh, okay, you might make less than me, or you might be at home all day, or whatever the case may be. It's like, but you're not, as we used to say, watching soap operas and eating bonbons. Right. Yeah. Right? It's like, no, actually, you're actually seeing a part of this. But then more importantly, which I think kind of ties into what you're trying to do with the show, or at least that dimension of it I see, they're realizing what they're missing. Yes. And so when they have the 9 yes. You hear me, right? So yes. 9 hours at work with the commute and all that stuff, nothing wrong with that. I love to travel, all those things. So sometimes I'm at the house, nothing wrong with that. It depends on what kind of vocation you have and how you want to make an impact in the world. But there's a certain undervaluement of the time spent at home, so-called rearing the kids. I hate that term, but I can't think of a better term, but like rearing the kids, making sure the house is run properly, making sure there's food on the table. That is hard work. Right. And I think that's been undervalued definitely through my lifetime. I mean, forever.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Correct. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
the, right. It's the excuse me. It's the support of the caveman who's going out and getting the food and hunting and gathering,
Right.
but not, the person at home who has to figure out what the hell to do with, this woolly mammoth. It's like that
Right.
part's not considered. Sorry for
Right.
the metaphor, but that
Yeah.
part's not considered as much. With all of us being at home, suddenly we're seeing everything.
Mhm.
And I've been privileged enough to be able to be, as they call it, a stay-at-home dad, or as I prefer, the primary caregiver. And I've seen all of it. And I look at, my fellows, whatever, and it's like they don't see it. It's like, yeah, like I have 2 kids now. Yeah, they just puked all over the place, but I also taught them to do a peanut butter and jelly sandwich,
Right.
which is a staple of mine. And
Yeah.
no one else is teaching them that.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like,
and
I
one of the
saw,
and that
right?
whole world of that's the water we swim in, right? So people can't even see it,
That's right.
is something that I discovered when I got handed white male privilege, because for me, it was almost like instantaneous and overnight. People, and I was, my brother and I were talking about this yesterday, how I wish I could download for people the difference, because it's so stark. And that's why I committed my life to serving women. Like I've always wanted to serve. I've been since I was 7. I've been in love with women. And being handed white male privilege overnight really was like, whoa, wow, that's insane. And especially since people can't even see it, like they don't even see that it's happening. So part of my commitment is just to have people become just another level conscious, right? Just even one more layer of consciousness.
I mean, one more layer would make a huge difference.
Right.
I
And I
agree.
feel like the Gen Z generation is already there. A lot of them anyway. I'm not saying we don't have your same, water we're swimming in, people spinning the same thing they're always doing. But I'm telling you, these Gen Z generation, a lot of them, they've got this figured out where they're not willing to buy into any of those gender binary rules. Right.
Yeah.
It's really about us keeping up. It's like my commitment is to serve the 45 plus people to help them get caught up so that they can actually talk to their grandkids. Some of this stuff.
Not
right?
that they're from outer space or something.
Yeah, because it's so interesting, because I come from a very, Southeast Kansas, still, it's very binary. I mean, I have nephews who are great nephews now who are in their 30s, coming up on 40s, and they're millennials, and they are taking more care of the kids, even in that really intense binary area. So things are getting different. That's for sure.
I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that you share about in your book that isn't necessarily about gender, but it is and it isn't, that you and I have very much in common. One of the things I talk about with my clients is I have them look at a perfect week, for example, like looking back over a Sunday, you had a perfect week. Like what did you do? What are the things? Because I assert that adults know what makes them happy. They just don't do it. The things.
That. Yeah, I hear you.
By now you're grown. You know the things that make you happy. You just don't do them. You just like to dive into the stress instead because there's more cortisol there. So so we talk about, and what, in your book, you talk about how you got to put your life in your business, not your business in your life. And so for me, this whole world of gender it's always just been who I am. And I'm so delighted to get to have this opportunity where I still have the coaching practice. I'm writing a new book. Like there's all kinds of stuff happening over here. Okay. And I still get to do the gender reveal, and they all fold into one inside this conversation. And why I'm so delighted to get to talk to you, because you have an insight into this that I think a lot of cis straight people don't have. And the fact that you are a Black guy, I think also gives you an insight into a gender dynamic that the rest of us don't see all the time.
Sure, I agree.
Right. And so I've talked a couple of different times, and I haven't ever talked to a straight Black guy about this actually, but I've talked to my trans guys who are men of color and started out as women of color. And the difference that, like I got handed white male privilege overnight. They got handed a history of Black men being seen as criminals and or other, and right.
That's a great observation. Yes.
So I'd love to hear your insights around that.
I'm not even sure where to start. Like,
well,
yeah,
we got some time.
it would take a lot to unpack there. Yeah, I think number one, I think it starts with these conversations. So understanding that, like you said, the fish in water, to understanding that there is privilege with that. There is a certain. I'll start with this. My kids are 8 and 5. And there's a certain conversation I had to have with them. Oh my gosh, that 1.5 years ago now. Time is flying. And here, this pandemic time is different.
It's very different.
1.5 years ago, almost 2 years ago, the May before last, when we had the trifecta of murders, right? So Aubrey and the two other folks that passed away, one of them in Minnesota. Like, it was a mess. And it was at the same time that we were starting to shelter in place with the pandemic. So it was like March, April, that period of time. And I think it was specifically Breonna Taylor, there was, I live in Las Vegas, and there were protests happening, particularly over a 2-3 week period of time. I remember it was late May. And it was right down on the strip, but it was happening all across America, all across the world, if I remember correctly. And I've written about this, but I realized that I wanted to join them. But the biggest impact I could make is make sure that my 2 Black boys were fine. And, my partner, again, she was on the front line at that time.
Right.
So even though she's a pediatrician, but still, she's been exposed to that every day. So if something happens to me or something happens to her, then everybody's in trouble. So that was layer 1 of that. But then the layer, which we talk for hours about that, but the layer 2 about that is, I think Alec was 6, he was 7, about to turn 8, trying to get my years straight. And I had to we call it the conversation. And it was funny because I had said that to, I believe it was definitely one of my white male friends, but I can't remember if he was part of the queer community or not, because it had been a little while. And I said, yeah, I just had to talk with my little guy. And they were like, wow, you're talking about the birds and the bees? I was like, no, but and he says, so from his white male perspective, like, he doesn't know what the conversation is. He thinks that we're talking about, penises and vaginas and all this other stuff. Like, no,
that's not the one.
We're talking about people like us are getting murdered.
Right.
And it's try not to curse here. It's the same crappy conversation.
Yeah, we're explicit because of my mouth. You can cuss all you want.
Okay, okay. That's me as a coach too. So if you coach with me, is what you're getting.
Right.
The same shitty conversation we had 40 years ago when I was around my son's age.
Mm-hmm.
Same shitty conversation my stepdad gave to me.
Mm-hmm.
And for sure, with my family being originally from the South, North Carolina and all that,
right,
definitely the same conversation they probably had when they were my youngest son's age, when he was 5.
Right.
Don't go across those tracks, et cetera, et cetera. Same shit.
Right.
That's that experience. And so, excuse me. So much love and respect to my friend who I was talking with. But that's like the best example I can give, where it's like, you're talking birds and the bees, and it's like, oh, okay, let me sit you down, son. And no, it's like not all cops have your best interest in mind.
No.
You might love firefighters, but they're also human underneath that badge and that hat. Mm-hmm. So just like you have certain teachers that you don't like or feel as though don't have your best interest in mind, you're like, I don't like that teacher, I'm gonna be careful around them. These are also people. So it's not gonna be automatically submission to them, but at the same time, keep an eye out for their actions. And if something doesn't feel right, then you go quietly and get out of there.
Right.
I'm saying this to like my 6-year-old.
Right.
So I think that's the best example I can give.
Yeah.
And all the things to unpack through that.
Right.
He's 6. He's still playing with Legos. I'm having this conversation with him.
Right.
And it makes me sad. And it also reiterates the work that I do.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. It makes the work that all the work that all of us are doing, that's the piece right there. When we can stop, when you don't have to have those conversations anymore, we can work ourselves out of business. Right. My child is a brown child. He's half native, and he's just his color of his skin is brown. And it's interesting to us because it wasn't really until 5th grade graduation that, first of all, they're brown, they're trans, and they use he, him pronouns, but wear a skirt. Right. So all the things.
Like, all the boxes checks, right?
Right. All the things. And it's fascinating to me, and it's always been a conversation for us as white parents, like, how do we best do this, right? And one of the things we noticed at 5th grade graduation is that all their friends are friends of color. Like, they segregated themselves out into this pocket of kids of color. There's a couple of white kids in there. They're queer white kids, right? So they have this queer kid of color vibe, going, which I'm so grateful for. They have this support group, and it's so interesting that, like, we're still doing that. Like, there's so much to figure out around that, right? Absolutely. And one of the things that, and boy, I mean, we could just talk all day. We don't have all day to talk about this. And, I use the word queer because queer is has a little anarchy in it, right? For me, it's like, I'm queer in my politics. I'm queer everywhere. I can't even think straight. I'm so queer. And until we can get to a place, I feel like, where we can work ourselves all out of business. And I assert that part of being a queer means I'm constantly having to check myself around the water I swim in as a white person who has been born and raised in a country completely developed on white supremacy. Like, it is unbelievable how much is the water I swim in, right? And so it's even, like, one of the things that I think we're dealing with right now is this world of what's respectable, what is respectability, when respectability from a white supremacist lens is not something we want our queer, Black, Indigenous, people of color kids to be kowtowing to. Right. And so it's like, how do we, and it's been an inquiry I've had for a while, is like, how do I instill respect? Like, I even just in my own house, we talk about this, where I grew up in a home where if an elder person walked in my house and I didn't get out of my chair, I'd be knocked out of it. I mean,
well, we have those conversations now.
That was very clear.
Well, we have just quick sidebar. We have the modern version of that, where if one of the grandparents, luckily they're all around, if one of the grandparents calls on FaceTime, it's modern equivalent of that, then you stop playing your game, whatever. And my wife's originally from India. So you go and you say to their language, it's like, how are you?
Right.
Even if it just takes like 5 seconds.
5 seconds, right? You get up. And it's that world of, like,
you do that, and then you get back to where you go. You're going, that's fine. But pay that homage, because without them, you wouldn't be here.
Right.
So you pay them the homage every single time.
Right. And though we do that inside our homes, right? And then I expect my kid to go out into a world where there's a white supremacist treating him differently because he's a brown kid. And yet I'm expecting him to be respectable, right? And I have a young trans woman of color who shared with me this quote. I'm going to quote Aurora Hicks here, where, if bias is a form of mental illness because you cannot see reality, then how do we have respect and show respect for people who are showing bias, which is
I'm not sure how much that is our responsibility. It's kind of like, I'm big on Toni Morrison. I quote her. I think I might quote her in Queer Remix, but I definitely quote her in the previous one, Go From Now. But it's that classic quote from a couple of decades ago, where she says, it's not on the onus of I always get screwed up. It's on the onus of people identifying with and allied to the queer community. I would add that part in there. People who are people of color. It's not, at a certain point, it's not our responsibility to figure out racism. It's actually up to the so-called prevailing party, because if you feel as though that you have to have someone else on their knees to feel superior, then it seems like the psychosis is really with you, not with us. And to be a little bit more action oriented with it, as far as what we can actually do, I think it's what we're doing now, where you might not be able to have the fish recognize they're in water, but you might be able to change the water.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think that's kind of the best thing. So even, I'll give a quick example. A lot of stuff is running through my head. So many examples of this, but I think the best example was when I was younger, I thought I had to be a lawyer or, I don't know, some type of politician or something to make an impact in the world. And my parents were wise enough to say, your impact is based on you showing up, you being in the room, or whatever the equivalent of that was in the 80s, you being in the room and having a seat at the table, and you doing what you do best, because that representation ends up changing the water. So like you said, I've done 4 TED Talks.
Yeah.
I'm usually, as we say, I'm usually representing. So I'm usually the black guy.
Right. No, I'm always the queer guy. I'm always the queer person.
Right. And in the black community, we call that representing. It's like, oh, you're representing. It's like, like I'm the only one. I was the only, black guy. I went to Northwestern, got my grad degree there in magazine publishing. I was representing.
Yeah.
And it was like me and one other black guy in a totally different program. And people used to get us mixed up. This was in 2000. It wasn't in the 80s.
I'm sorry.
I was about to say, I'm sure you did some of that too.
Oh God, yeah.
And so, excuse me, but that's my way, our way of changing the water.
Yeah,
so
like
I'm not
the water.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what I'm hoping. This is what my point too is that please. I feel like the pandemic is doing this for us. Right?
Oh, because how so?
Well, because first of all, like, let's just go with teachers, right? So we're at the point now where we're like, we've got, I don't know about you, how you're in Kansas, but we're taking in subs without licenses. There's all kinds of stuff.
We're pretty desperate in Vegas.
People are going to make an impact on our kids, and the people who can't handle any kind of environment that is shifting the way that these Gen Z kids are starting to think are going to just get chased right out of there. They're going to get chased right out of there. And absolutely. I feel like that's what I'm affirming. Like, I'm affirming this wave of goodness that is coming, and that's inclusive and belonging and all the things that is, and that those who are, and you can tell it's like rats abandoning a sunken ship, right? I mean, it's like, I feel that's what my vision. This is just my story.
Particularly, I think it sounds like your area is pretty conservative too.
Well, yeah, I'm in Kansas. I'm in the only place I could live in Kansas, which is Lawrence, Kansas, and it's a college town.
I've heard of Lawrence.
I have a friend who taught me this phrase called "islands of sanity," which are little blue island college towns in conservative states.
I used to live in New Orleans. So
yeah, there you go.
And I left
Austin,
New Orleans,
Texas, right?
I was like, oh, this is the rest of Louisiana.
Right, exactly.
No offense, like, I have friends in other parts of Louisiana.
Oh yeah, 100%.
They know what I'm saying.
So yeah. No, I'm in.
They know exactly what I'm saying.
I'm in red Kansas, and I'm in a blue town in a red state. So, and I moved back here to help take care of my mom, and right now, and how it's always been for me in a conservative area is I need to be here. There's work to do. We got a lot of work to do.
We actually, we've moved quite a bit, as you can probably tell. I'm originally from South Jersey. I lived all across the country. Excuse me. And a handful of years ago, we moved to Ohio. And this was after my partner and I had started our family in Southern California. And it was pretty radical. It was different, right?
Yeah.
We were actually in the more progressive part of Ohio, and it was still like, whoa. Because again, my wife's Indian, so it's like we have, Black and brown kids, and it's like nobody here looks like us, like, at all. But it was at a period of time when, I'd say 2015, 2016, when things started to get really intense with the discourse, as they say. And I remember my partner and I talking about it, and her being like, yeah, I don't know this might not be a good time for you as a Black man, me as an Indian woman to like move to the middle of, not the heartland as much as you are, but, to the Midwest. And I was like, and I was just really getting serious about my coaching practice. And I was like, no, this is like the perfect time because they need us. And sure enough, the conversations we had there, particularly it was around the time of the election and all this stuff, the conversations we had there, by the time we left a few years later, the people around us had changed. Mm-hmm. And not in a bad way, not in a, it's not like we're evangelists, but more like being comfortable having uncomfortable conversations.
Right.
You probably read that in Queer Remix, but I'm a big Brene Brown fan. So I love that idea of uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah.
Like I'm loving this conversation, but we're talking about uncomfortable topics.
Right.
And I think this is how you show up.
Right. Yeah.
We're talking about trauma. We're talking about challenges. We're talking about, white supremacy. It's not light stuff.
Right.
But how are we going to, again, to use a metaphor, how are we going to change the water if we're not having these conversations?
Yeah.
I love having conversations. And so just like you, me being in the middle of Ohio and having these challenging conversations, even with like my super conservative neighbor, they were different. And so was I, to be honest.
Well, because heart to heart is what, that's why I always say I want to love the transphobia out of people, because I just show up and have to make people love me. I'm like, once you love me, it's hard to be mean to me. So that's my goal, is always to show up. And I tell you what, I've had people, because I've been out since 1990. I took my first, I've been out as a queer since 1985, but I took my first shot of testosterone in 2001, and I was always out. And
you're really out.
I've been really out forever. Sure. And so I've had people call me from 20 years later that I hadn't heard or people who just sat in a class with me or, whatever. And they'll be like, my kid came out as trans, the first person I thought of. I still get those conversations constantly because I'm the only trans person people know. I'm often the only queer trans person people know.
That is amazing. That is amazing. Yeah, excuse me. I think I have the privileged perspective of, knowing a lot of people in the queer community. So that blows my mind. I'm like, what?
Right.
But realizing that's not everyone, just like,
I
understand where you're going. And that again, that representing, it has impact much bigger than we know. And I appreciate you saying that, because I often forget that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. So you're delightful. We could talk all day, obviously. And I have to wrap up. And this whole time I haven't mentioned our sponsor, Fire and Bliss. I don't know if you're familiar with fireandbliss.com, but I want to introduce you to Fire and Bliss Creative. And they are Fire and Bliss Creative supports artists that are Black and Indigenous people of color and queer. And they make sure that those artists get their money for their art, right? And they take good care of them. So if you go to fireandbliss.com and you hit /reveal, you'll see the collection that I curated. And you can if you buy art there, use the coupon REVEAL for 20% off. I noticed you have some beautiful art behind you. And so I think it's sometimes hard to find, it's hard to find art, and who's queer artists and Black and Indigenous people of color, and how are they getting their art out there?
I'm obviously representing here, but
right. Exactly. Right. He's got some beautiful art. For those of you watching the video, he's got beautiful art behind him. So they're our sponsor, and I love them, and I appreciate them. And I want to mention our Patreon page where you can come and support us. And we're going to do some behind the scenes stuff for you, and you can get a mug and all the things.
I have mugs too, so we love them.
No, we love the mugs.
We love the mugs.
The gender reveal party mug. We're going to be sending you one too. So last thoughts, Damon. I'm so glad we connected, and I don't think this will be the last time.
No, not at all. I've loved talking with you. Yeah, it's about that time already. That's crazy. The hour has come by. I could have swore it was only a few minutes. The stuff that we're talking about is a lot of stuff that I talk about in my work. And I think I guess I was kind of getting at this earlier. The biggest impact that we can make isn't necessarily, beating someone over the head with a particular agenda or perspective. I think the best work we can do often is helping people understand how they can be more of their best self based on understanding other points of view. I'm pretty biased with that because I'm a journalist. So it's like, so that's been part of my energy. But I mean, showing up fully, just like you're talking about, Jay, like someone getting to know you, and also you're trans. Even though trans is a big part of your identity, but people are seeing you and realizing it's that. You know, like I have black hair, but you're getting to know me.
Right.
The black hair is part of me. I'm very proud of my black hair, but you're getting to know me first.
Sure.
And I think if we take that approach to things as activists, as speakers, as coaches, whatever creative things we do, I think there's a ton of power in that.
I agree.
And I think you might have mentioned this offline or when we first started, where there's so much work that for both you and I that we do, where it's all the same. Like the conversation I'm having with you is the same conversation or similar to the conversation I would have when I did my book last year with Career Remix, the new book. Same conversation I had with a coaching client, same conversation I had if I'm doing a keynote later on this year. It's all the same. And at least for me as a coach, I'm trying to help people unify all these different pieces. And again, I so respect your work because your identity and who you represent as and what matters to you on your long and winding journey. We all have long and winding journeys, but I think yours is like a lot more pronounced. To get this far and to integrate all those different pieces. I mean, I think that's something that we should all strive for. And I think the closer we get to finding that core, that center of who we are and being proud of it and making peace with that, then the more we can actually inspire other people to be who they are. And I was listening to, watching your gender reveal event and you talking about how there's so many things that you disliked when you were young that are really a really important part to yourself now. Like in us talking, how many other people, maybe there could have been a few years staved off that journey. And maybe instead of at 19, you would have discovered that at 15 or at 6.
Right.
You know, it makes me emotional where it's like the work that we do, the work that we can do can actually help people have some type of blueprint so they can get there faster.
Yeah.
I think the long game, the more people are closer to their true selves, the less strife and issues and prejudice is going to be.
Amen.
So,
yeah.
Going for the long game.
Amen. Yeah. And that's why we came here, right? I think we came here. I ultimately think we came here to learn to love ourselves and unpack everything we wired ourselves up to be in terms of our own safety. That's a whole other conversation.
I was like, okay,
that's
we're not gonna go there yet.
Other conversation. But we're here to like unlearn everything and learn that we're love. As far as I'm concerned, like my true nature is love, and so I just appreciate having you. Can you tell us where to find you and where to get your TED Talks and all the things? Of course.
Yeah. So my center is at my headquarters is at damonbrown.net. Get everything Damon Brown there. I have a and I have a YouTube show called the Bring Your Worst Show every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, so Vegas time.
Nice.
And we're hitting 200 episodes, I think.
Sweet.
Week. Yeah, it's been up for a year and a half, so
right on.
I'm loving it. I love connecting with folks. I do a live show almost every Wednesday.
Nice.
And so you have your comments and questions. And my main thing is helping you as a non-traditional entrepreneur, whether you're a side hustle, you're a solopreneur, you have little kids at home, you have aging parents, you're a person of color, or you're part of the queer community, or all the above, which some of my clients are, and helping you on your journey to maximize your resources, be more of your true self, and make the impact that you're supposed to make in the world.
Nice.
That's it. That's it.
I love it. I love it. So check him out, Damon Brown. Thank you so much for being my guest today. It's just been such a great time getting to know you. Thank you. Hey, thanks for listening to the Gender Reveal Party podcast. I hope you loved it. And if you did, would you take a second and go do all the things like subscribe, rate, review, tell all your friends. Apparently, if you do that, the podcast platforms are more likely to share it. And if you think these stories are important, please take 3 minutes to just go do that. I'd really appreciate it. Also, I'd love to connect with you on social. On Instagram and Facebook, I'm at the Gender Reveal Party, and on Twitter, I'm at Pryor J. It's a real joy and privilege to bring you this podcast. Come back soon. Love you, bye.